to Planning for Aging. Welcome to Tea at Taxevity, where you get insights from people who make life better, our clients and friends. My name is Pramod Sharma and I'm your host. Our guest today is Gary Hepworth, a senior care consultant at Premier Home Care Services here in West Toronto. Welcome, Gary.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, thanks for joining us. In a sentence or two, what do you do?
Well, I own Premier Home Care Services here in West Toronto. I've owned it for the last 4 years. And we provide services to primarily seniors in the area. So we generally provide personal support workers to people who would like to stay at home. So we send generally what is known as a PSW to someone's home to help them with various daily life activities. Help them bathe, help them get dressed, help them eat, so they can actually stay in their home and be independent, which is the whole focus is of allowing people to become independent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's very valuable because people are aging and we're talking about planning for aging. What are the areas that people need to focus on?
Well, I look at the three major areas people need to look at because we are aging, we're living longer than we ever have, and people I think need to look at their housing plan. Where are they going to live? They may be retired for 30 years and they need to think about, where do I want to live 20, 30 years from now? They need to look at their financial plan in terms of, do I have the finances and the assets and the income to fund potentially 30 years of retirement?
Mm-hmm.
And then lastly, there may be health issues. And what are you doing? What are you planning to make sure you've got the care you require from the healthcare system, the hospital system, and beyond the healthcare system from companies that provide services to the community?
Okay, and each of those is an important area. So let's start talking about housing first.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So I think as people are aging, they have some options. Most people I run into want to stay at home. They want to live at home. So if you want to stay at home and retire at home and age at home, you need to look at your home to decide, okay, is it set up for potentially if I have to be in a wheelchair at some point, is there enough room for a wheelchair?
But do people even want to think about those possibilities?
Most people don't. I think my advice to people is you want to plan when you're healthy and you've got the time and you've got the ability to actually plan, because you don't want to end up making decisions in a crisis because you're generally going to make the wrong decision. And if you can plan ahead, now some people don't want to stay at home or don't want to live in their own home. They may want to move into a retirement home.
You mean that's their planning? They want to go to a
They want to go to a retirement home because they've decided house maintenance is too much of a hassle. They don't want to pay for it and worry about shoveling the driveway, et cetera, et cetera. So if they move into a retirement residence, someone else is taking care of that.
But why wouldn't they want to simply go into a condo?
The condo is an option too. But if you're moving into a condo and you're aging, you want to make sure that if there's some services that you need, are you getting those particular services?
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And I think, so retirement homes, if you want to move into a retirement home, now is the time to think about, well, which one? So now's the time to do the research, because they all offer various options and services. So now's the time to research them and find out which ones are of interest.
Okay, so when you say now, how many years prior to retirement, say?
Well, I think most people if we say the old 65, most people aren't retiring at 65 right now. But we're dealing with two generations here. We're dealing with the boomer generation, who may be caring for or providing some assistance for parents. So it may be not you per se you're planning for, it could be a parent.
Okay.
So you're planning for, okay, my mother or father or both may need to go into a retirement home, or they want to go into a retirement home because we want to sell the house. Okay, what are my options in the West End of Toronto perhaps?
Mm-hmm.
And if there's a situation comes up that because of their healthcare situation, they may need to go into long-term care, which used to be called nursing homes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, there's various options for people to choose from. So now again, if you're thinking that's maybe something that has to happen, the time to research is when you've got the time to do it.
Okay.
As opposed to someone saying, okay, I need a decision today. And I think for those kind of facilities, it's not necessarily where your parent per se is moving to, what's the convenience for someone who has to visit them.
Oh, that's a good point. Okay, so you want them to be closer to where you are so that you can cut down on your commuting.
That's a possible consideration for people, yes. So you've got, as I said, most people that I interact with want to stay in their homes as long as they can, but circumstances may change that they can no longer do the maintenance. They want someone else to deal with it, or their health care becomes a situation where they actually have to go into a long-term care facility.
Okay, are there any other issues around housing?
Well, I think housing, there's options in various parts of the cities have different options. So you've got to do your research. And the good news out there is there's a lot more information on the web, internet than there ever used to be. So you can actually find out a lot of information about almost any residence in Ontario and do
Okay.
your residence. And one of the things I also do on my volunteer side is I chair CARP Etobicoke,
Mm-hmm.
which used to be called the Canadian Association of Retired Persons. We dropped that name 5 years ago,
Okay.
but generally is 55 plus. That's the membership,
Mm-hmm.
and our focus is education and advocacy, and housing and facilities and residences for seniors is a very big issue for our particular chapter.
Okay. Okay, that makes sense. Okay, so we talked about housing, and then you also mentioned that financing is another area for planning.
True, because I think people don't realize that they're actually going to live longer than they thought. The days of us, retiring at 65 and maybe having to fund retirement for 10 to 15 years, I think those days are over because life expectancy now has grown to a point where if you're 65 and you're healthy, there's an excellent chance you're going to live to 95, if not
Mm-hmm.
more. And for some people, that kind of shocks them to think, I have to fund 30 years of retirement, and do I have the funds for that? And that's why people may actually choose to stay in the workforce longer, which is why CARP was totally opposed to any kind of age discrimination or mandatory retirement. We're glad that's basically gone sideways now.
Right.
So people are working longer because they sense they need to, because they need that income or build up their asset
Mm-hmm.
base. Some people can retire. Good for them. They still retire early. That's great.
Mm-hmm.
But we're living longer. Healthcare has allowed us to live longer,
Right.
and we need to ensure that we've got the funding to do that, because I think one of the biggest fears that people have is that they're going to run out of money.
Yes, yeah, that's
And
longevity risk, and
longevity risk. So
it's a growing
therefore,
concern.
what am I doing to ensure that I don't run out of money
Mm-hmm.
if I have to fund my retirement for 30 or more years? Because one of the fastest growing age groups in this country right now is people living over 100. Those numbers are
Mm-hmm.
going to be increasing substantially. So it's not maybe 30 years of retirement, it could be 40 years of retirement that you're looking at funding. So it has impacts financially, also has impacts on the government and how we fund certain things in society.
Right. And when we talk about the government, we mean us because we are the
Yeah,
taxpayers.
we're the
It's not some
taxpayer.
separate entity.
Yeah, there's issues around old age security right now that, and it's not funded long term. It's a challenge. And,
Mm-hmm.
we have an aging population, so the boomers are working their way through, and suddenly all the boomers hit age 65 and they're going to get old age security. And in the day is, how are we going to fund all this? And
Right.
that becomes a challenge for society to tackle, is huge aging population. What are the funding issues that we need to talk about?
Mm-hmm. Right. And then the third area is healthcare.
Yeah, healthcare. And I think at this point, seniors make up about 15% of the Canadian population. But
A senior being someone over
we say
65.
65 and over.
Okay.
It's still,
Mhm.
it's still what we use as a senior. But seniors account for 50% of healthcare spending in this country. So as you age, the chance of you using and needing healthcare grow. And you need to look at, okay, if I'm going to develop a chronic disease, which that we're now living in the world of chronic disease, where arthritis, diabetes, high blood pressure, osteoporosis, these are all now diseases that just continue and people live with them for a long time. Drugs,
There's no cure for
no
those.
cure, but there's
Mhm.
drugs, medication, there's treatments, but these are major costs on the healthcare system. In
Mhm.
addition, there's what I call the scourge of Alzheimer's dementia, which is going to major impact on society. And if there's an excellent chance, at certain age groups, you're potentially going to develop a chronic disease. And if you need to access healthcare system, you need to understand, what the government through a hospital and our healthcare system provides,
Mhm.
and what it can't provide. And that's the part people need to plan for: is what do I need to take care of myself? Which means tapping
Right.
into other private resources like home care or like moving into a retirement residence. These are things. So if people can't take care of themselves at a certain age, they need to make decisions around who in fact is going to provide that care.
Mhm.
And as a society right now, most care is being provided by the family.
Oh, it is because there are a lot of divorces too. So
Yeah.
and not as many children. So that doesn't seem like the greatest
No,
source.
I think the role of women has changed in society. Women
Mhm.
are working, but still to today, most care in this country is provided by the family. It tends to be wives and daughters that are the chief caregivers, unpaid,
Mm-hmm.
huge stress. Many of them may have full-time jobs. They're trying to raise kids, and at the same time, maybe they're trying to help them care for their parents.
Okay, so in a situation like that, if money were available, then would they tend to hire people to provide some of that help?
Yeah, that's one option they can do because I think, first of all, the family may be available to provide some help.
Right.
The government, through its agencies, and the agency in Ontario is referred to as CCAC, which provides some community help and home care, but it's limited because it's a government agency, therefore it has a
Mm-hmm.
fixed budget.
Right.
People always expect more of it, but it's limited to what they can do
Mm-hmm.
because it's our taxes funding it.
Yes.
So therefore there becomes this gap, and therefore then people then can tap into the private market like the company I own, which provides private care. So we can then provide care for families who want to and have the financial resources to pay for it, to bring in a caregiver to take care of their loved one. And we provide care anywhere from 3 hours a day right through to 24 hours a day. It all depends on what the needs are. And we'll go anywhere too, because some people who live in retirement homes or long-term care homes still bring in extra care because they want their particular loved one to get extra care and extra.
Okay, so you're not just providing care in people's private homes, you can provide care in the facilities they're in.
It's true, because some retirement homes may have some services that you can purchase and some don't.
Oh.
And if you want extra care in a retirement home, you can bring it in through a private agency. And in long-term care homes, these are government-funded, taxpayer-subsidized facilities. They have a limited staff.
Right.
So there's a certain ratio between staff and residents. So if you decide, no, you want your mother to get more attention and more care,
Mm-hmm.
you can then bring in a private caregiver. And that's something we're seeing more people starting to do because they want individualized care. Now, unfortunately, for lower income people, the challenge is how they tap into. So one thing that I try to do is always try and direct people to a resource, whether it's a nonprofit, whether it's a government agency, to try and get them the care they require, because not everyone can afford to purchase care.
Right. Now, does long-term care insurance provide a reasonable mechanism to provide some money for these costs?
Yeah, I think the key word is some there.
Right.
It can help, and I think for a certain age, it's probably something people want to look at. I think it's been around in the U.S. a long time. It's still relatively new in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, long-term care insurance will pay for some costs either in a facility or through home care.
Mm-hmm.
And it's something I would think people want to investigate.
Mm-hmm.
So it's, and I think it makes sense at a certain age because premiums obviously are tied to the age. I think, once you're into your 70s, it's probably it's very cost prohibitive in terms of premiums for something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I've developed products in my career, and critical illness insurance and long-term care insurance are difficult for people to get their heads around because there's a feeling that we have such a great healthcare system that everything we need will be taken care of.
Well, that's kind of a Canadian way. We kind of expect that the government's going to take care of it, but I think the challenge we face as society is because we have an aging population and there's this huge demand coming down the system.
Mm-hmm.
The resources aren't going to be there. The government right now has deficits, and they're trying to figure out how to fund the current state, let alone the future.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And unless we're looking at massive increases in taxes, which Canadians, I'm sure, are not going to embrace, something's got to give.
Mm-hmm.
So there's going to be some trade-offs and discussions around our healthcare system because we, as a society, cannot provide the services that people all expect. And whether it's in long-term care facilities, whether it's home care, healthcare is the largest single item in the government budget, and it's increasing at a rate higher than inflation every year.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a topic that politicians tend to shy away off from because people get upset. They think if you mess with my health care, I'm not going to vote for you. But it's probably a conversation we need to have in terms of how are we going to fund our healthcare system going forward, and are there some trade-offs that we need to discuss?
Right, because there are things that are within our control, our circle of influence is what Stephen Covey calls it, and that's where we can take some actions. And there are other things that are broader where we can't have as much impact.
Yeah, one of the things that we talk about in CARP, and I do presentations, the two things that we can control about our own health is our diet, what we eat, and our exercise. There's so many health issues that can be improved if we have the right diet and we exercise.
Mm-hmm.
Some things we can't control, like our genes and hereditary and maybe the environment, but some things we can control. North Americans, we probably don't have the best diet. There's other countries in the world that have longevity much higher than Canadians and a much healthier society because they have a very different diet than we do. And we tend to be a society that doesn't particularly exercise as much as maybe we should do.
Right.
And that all comes back to impact our health as we age, unfortunately. And I think one thing we need to look at as a society, Canada, and government and taxes, we have spent a lot of money and thrown a lot of money into the healthcare system over the last decade. Governments have really spent a lot of money on healthcare to the point where now Canada is number 2 per capita in the world in terms of healthcare spending.
Okay, probably number 2 to the U.S.
Yeah.
Okay.
But in terms of outcome and results, we're not number 2. We're quite a ways down the list. So therefore, people ask, okay, are we getting the bang for the buck? Where's the money all going? What's it being spent on? There's clearly some inefficiencies in the system. So that's something we can tackle, because if there's better ways of doing it, like using technology always comes up, better use of technology in terms of healthcare, removing duplication of services. So there's things we can look at that can help us with some of the funding, but sometimes it's just a matter of there's going to be more funding required.
Right.
Governments talk about home care, and they tend to talk about the government funded side of home care. But since there's no new money in the system because, we're not raising taxes,
right,
it's, okay, where are they getting the money from? It's going to come from somewhere else, and that tends to create issues for somebody else. So.
Absolutely. Okay, well, thank you for all of your tips on planning for aging. What's the best way for people to reach you?
I'm reachable through our office at Premier Home Care. We operate here in the West End of Toronto. So our phone number is 416-623-8229. And our website is premieretobico.com. And if you want to reach us through CARP, CARP website is carp.ca. So a lot of really good information on the CARP website about a lot of these issues.
Okay, well, thanks for visiting us.
Pleasure.
Thanks for joining us for Tea at Taxevity. The Taxevity Insurance Advisory helps you understand insurance and bridges gaps in your coverage. There's no premium for peace of mind. How healthy is your insurance?